John reminded me about the children's talk when I arrived, and so I'm going to tell you about a boy and a girl, a brother and sister, and their mum said, we're going to go shopping. And I don't know about you, but when I was a boy, I didn't really want to go shopping with my mum. It was pretty boring stuff, buying a loaf of bread and a pint of milk, and she might start looking at things that I wasn't interested in. So the idea of going shopping really wasn't something that I want to do. Maybe you like going shopping with your mum or dad because maybe they buy you things, and so you think, well, if we go to the shops, I'm going to get something, I'm sure. But this little boy and girl, they went to a busy shopping centre with their mum, and mum said, look, there's a toy shop, and I want you to stand outside. You can look at the toys through the window, but don't go anywhere. I'm just got to run one or two quick errands around the shops, and then I'll be back. And then we're going to go and get something to eat, you see. Anyway, the boy and the girl, they stood outside the toy shop and they were looking at the toys through the window, and they got bored with that after a couple of minutes, and they said, well, look, let's go inside the shop and see what other toys they've got. And so they went inside the shop, and they started looking around there. Well, it wasn't long before they got bored with that, and then they saw a sweet shop. And they said, well, look, let's go and have a look at those lovely sweets in the window over there. And they went to the sweet shop, you see, and they didn't realise that they'd been gone for quite some time. And when they went back to the toy shop, you see, their mum wasn't there. Their mum had arrived, they weren't there, and she was now searching for them. And so they started to cry, and they were getting quite upset. And one of the shopkeepers said, I'll have to call the police. And hopefully the police can find your mum for you. And anyway, the police officer arrived and said what's happened, and the shopkeeper told them that this little boy and girl were now lost and they couldn't find their mummy. And he said, okay, look, I'm going to have to take a few details. He said, do you know your mum's name? So the little girl said, yeah. He said, well, that's good. I'll write it down. And he said, what is it then? And she said, it's Mum. Okay, Mum. He said, has Mum got a telephone? So the little boy said, yes, she has. He said, well, can you give me the number? They said, no. So he said, right, so I don't know your mum's name. I haven't got a number. Do you know where you live? He said, no, we don't know where we live. We don't know our address. He said, well, look, there's only one thing I can do. He said, you'll have to come with me to the police station, and I hope that your mum will turn up at some point saying that she's lost her two children, and we can then hand you over. So the little boy and girl were very upset, as you can imagine, and they started walking out of the shopping centre with the policeman, and the police officer was walking down the road, and they were getting near the police station, and suddenly the little girl, she saw a cross, and it was outside a church. And she said to the police officer, if you can take us to the cross, we can find our way home from there. You see, they knew that they only lived just around the corner from that church that had a big cross outside. So if the police officer could take them to the cross outside the church, they knew their way home from there. And the good news is that they did get home safely, and they were reunited with their mum, and it was a nice end to the story. But there's a good lesson in that for all of us, not just for the boys and girls, but for us who are adults, and that is this. That if we want to find our way to God's house and be with him one day in heaven, then we have to come to the cross first. If we can find our way to the cross, we can find God's house from there. And this is what we do when we tell people the gospel. We are saying that you need to acknowledge your sin. You need to believe that in the Lord Jesus Christ dying on the cross, that he died in your place for your sin. And if you really do believe that, and you're sorry for the sins that you've done, you ask God for forgiveness. And if you mean it with all your heart, you will be forgiven. And instead of being lost, you are now found. And not only are you found, but one day you'll be going to be with God in his house. So remember that, boys and girls, if you want to get right with God and know God as your Father, then you have to come to the cross and ask for forgiveness.